Welcome to latest News Blaster. The news came like a thunderclap across the community. A respected pastor, once seen as a spiritual giant, suddenly resigned from his position after being confronted with serious allegations. For years, his sermons drew thousands, his messages aired on television, and his presence inspired countless lives. But behind the polished smile and the carefully chosen words, whispers were already growing louder, whispers that pointed toward a storm he could no longer escape. On a quiet Sunday morning, instead of opening the service with his usual words of encouragement, the pastor stood before his congregation with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he confessed that he could not continue in his role. The church auditorium, filled with loyal followers, fell into stunned silence. Some gasped, others wept. Many refused to believe what they were hearing. The truth, however, was unavoidable. The pastor had been confronted with allegations that questioned his integrity, his leadership, and even his private life. The rise of a respected leader. For nearly 2 decades, the pastor had been considered a pillar of faith. His sermons blended modern inspiration with traditional doctrine. He knew how to smile at the camera, how to speak to the brokenhearted, and how to make scripture feel personal. His social media platforms boomed, his books sold out, and his influence extended far beyond the 4 walls of his church. People came to him for advice, prayer, and guidance. Families credited him with saving marriages. Teenagers said his words gave them hope, and communities admired how he built charities for the poor. On the surface, his life looked perfect, a picture of success both spiritually and socially. But beneath that image was a story waiting to unravel. The first whispers. Members of the church leadership team began noticing unusual patterns: late-night meetings, phone calls he avoided, nervous behavior when certain questions were raised. Some dismissed it as stress. After all, leading a megachurch is no easy task. Others, however, started piecing things together. Then came the anonymous letters, typed pages delivered to the church office, each one making bold claims about the pastor's behavior. At first, the leadership hesitated to believe them. Anonymous accusations can often be malicious, especially against high-profile leaders. But as the weeks passed, more evidence surfaced: emails, recorded conversations, even photographs. By the time the board decided to confront him, the weight of the allegations was undeniable. The confrontation. It was a tense evening inside the church office. A select group of elders, men and women who had stood by his side for years, asked the pastor to sit down. The room was filled with silence, only the ticking of a clock echoing through the walls. One of the elders finally spoke. "Pastor, we need to ask you directly about these allegations." The documents were laid on the table. Each page represented a piece of evidence, each one heavier than the last. The pastor's face turned pale. His hand shook as he reached for a glass of water. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. For years, he had been the one delivering truth from the pulpit, but now he was the one being confronted. At first, he denied everything. He claimed it was a setup. He suggested that jealous rivals wanted to see him fall, but as the questions grew sharper and the evidence stronger, his defenses crumbled. Finally, with tears streaming down his face, he whispered words that would forever change his legacy. "I can't fight this anymore. I resign." Shockwaves through the congregation. News traveled fast. Within hours, social media lit up with speculation. Members of the church messaged each other in disbelief. Some defended him, insisting that the allegations were exaggerated or false. Others admitted that they had long suspected something was wrong. By the next morning, the story was trending on multiple platforms. Headlines screamed, "Pastor steps down amid allegations," while bloggers and journalists rushed to dig deeper into the scandal. For the congregation, it was more than just a headline. It was personal. This was the man who had baptized their children, officiated their weddings, and counseled them during dark seasons. To imagine him guilty of serious wrongdoing felt almost impossible. Yet the truth hung over them like a shadow. Something had happened, and their pastor could no longer hide it. The resignation was shocking enough, but the details of the allegations would prove even more devastating. For weeks, church members had whispered about something wrong, but no one knew exactly what that meant. Now, for the first time, the truth began to surface. And it wasn't just one small issue. It was a tangled web of accusations, each one painting a darker picture than the last. Financial misconduct. The first wave of allegations centered on money. For years, the pastor had preached about generosity and stewardship. He encouraged members to give faithfully, promising that their tithes were going toward outreach programs, missions, and the poor. Many in the congregation sacrificed vacations, luxuries, and even necessities to give to the church, trusting that their leader would use the money wisely. But internal audits revealed a troubling pattern. Funds had been redirected toward personal expenses, luxury vacations disguised as leadership retreats, expensive vehicles labeled as ministry tools, and even credit card charges that raised eyebrows. When confronted, the pastor insisted that these expenses were necessary for the growth of the ministry. People expect their pastor to live with excellence, he argued, but the numbers told a different story. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had vanished into questionable spending, leaving the board to ask, was this generosity gone wrong or deliberate exploitation? Inappropriate relationships. If financial misconduct was the spark, allegations of inappropriate relationships became the wildfire. Several individuals came forward, claiming that the pastor had crossed boundaries that no spiritual leader should ever cross. One former staff member recalled late-night texts that began innocently but quickly turned suggestive. Another admitted to a private meeting that left her uncomfortable and confused about the pastor's intentions. The most damning testimony came from someone who described years of manipulation, emotional, spiritual, and eventually physical. The church board tried to keep the details quiet to protect the victims, but rumors spread faster than fire. For a congregation that had long admired their leader as a man of integrity, the idea of secret affairs was almost unthinkable. Yet the stories were consistent, detailed, and painfully believable. Abuse of power. The allegations didn't stop there. Multiple church employees began speaking up about a culture of intimidation. According to them, the pastor ruled with an iron fist, punishing anyone who dared to question his authority. Staff members were allegedly fired for small mistakes, volunteers were shamed publicly, and leaders who disagreed with him were pushed out quietly. One elder described it this way: he preached love from the pulpit, but behind closed doors, it was fear. If you didn't obey, you were gone. This revelation was particularly devastating because it revealed a pattern of control that explained why so few people had dared to speak up sooner. The pastor's influence was so strong that many believed opposing him was the same as opposing God. The victims speak. Once the resignation became public, victims who had remained silent began stepping forward. Some gave interviews anonymously, while others bravely revealed their names and faces. Each testimony added another layer to the scandal. A former youth leader described how she felt pressured to stay quiet after receiving late-night phone calls from the pastor. I was told that if I said anything, I would ruin the ministry, she said. For years, I carried the guilt alone. Another member admitted that he had been blacklisted from the church after questioning the financial reports. I just asked for transparency. The next thing I knew, I was removed from leadership. Friends stopped talking to me. It felt like exile. Their stories echoed across social media, sparking outrage and heartbreak. Many churchgoers felt torn between loyalty to the pastor they loved and compassion for the victims who suffered under his leadership. The pastor's silence. After his tearful resignation, the pastor disappeared from the public eye. His once active social media accounts went dark. He stopped posting sermons, devotionals, or even casual family pictures. For a man who had lived under the spotlight for so long, the silence was deafening. Journalists camped outside his home, hoping for a statement. News anchors invited him to speak his side of the story. Some begged him to clarify whether the allegations were true, exaggerated, or completely false, but no words came. This silence left a vacuum that critics quickly filled. Every day new theories emerged. Some said he was preparing a legal defense. Others believed he was negotiating